Everywhere you look, people are praising the RE4 Remake. Big YouTube channels are lavishing it with praise. Mutahar loved it. SkillUp loved it. Sphere Hunter loved it. G-Man loved it. IGN and GameSpot gave it perfect scores. But what about here? Well, I'm here to tell you that I am jumping on the train. Choo-choo! This game is fantastic. It's nice to not be let down by something I've been incredibly hyped for. I haven't been impatiently awaiting the release of a title this intensely since Doom Eternal in 2020. And like Doom, RE4 had me grinning from ear to ear, beginning to end. These days I mostly stick to the indie scene. AAA titles rarely do much for me. Last year, my worst of list was comprised solely of AAA titles, but every once in a while, a game comes along that shows us the true magnificence that a big-budget blockbuster title can achieve. That is what the RE4 Remake is, an achievement, a standard raiser, an experience that's made with so much love and attention to detail and respect for the people playing it. Yes, I love the RE4 Remake, and if I didn't have to move on to other titles for the sake of this channel, I would probably just play it every day for months. On this channel, sometimes we talk about whether something is survival horror or action horror. Resident Evil coined the term survival horror with RE1 back in 1996, and then created the action horror genre in 2005 with RE4. It toned down or straight up removed a lot of what made the originals so beloved by their fans, in favor of a more linear, high-octane action experience where you're running around blasting everyone away and getting coins for kills like an arcade game. It was excellent, but it was a big departure. A whole new type of game had been created. Games like Dead Space followed in its footsteps, and the survival horror genre of old has largely disappeared from the mainstream. But in recent years, we've seen a resurgence of classic survival horror in the indie scene, with titles like Signalis, Tormented Souls, Elisa, the upcoming Heartworm, and Echoes of the Living. And the RE2 Remake brought survival horror gameplay back into the AAA space in 2019, showing that it still has a place. What's interesting about this year, 2023, is that the two titles at the forefront of the action horror genre, RE4 and Dead Space, have seen remakes that integrate more survival horror aspects into their design, making them far more interesting experiences. Dead Space added more connectivity in its map design, better exploration and backtracking, stricter inventory limits, and even a decent puzzle for once. And now, RE4 Remake has brought so much of the original trilogy's DNA into the mix that it ultimately blurs the line between action horror and survival horror, to the point where I don't even know what to call it anymore. That's probably the most interesting aspect of this remake. That's what I'd like to focus on in this video. Normally I would be defensive over someone calling an action horror title survival horror, but this time around, if someone calls RE4 Remake survival horror, I kinda have to say, yeah, I see where you're coming from. Frequently in the RE4 Remake, I was opening my map to orient myself and figure out where I wanted to go. Not just for treasure hunting or to see if I didn't check out some out-of-the-way corner, but to complete my main objective. I'm not saying it never happened in the original, but it's been amped up here. These locations feel a lot more exploration focused, and it's such a welcome addition. There's more backtracking involved, and like the Dead Space remake, they've sprinkled stuff all over the maps that can only be unlocked as you pass back through old areas. In a decision I must applaud, they have not included on-screen mission objectives or waypoints for modern lazy audiences. Nothing on screen tells you where to go or what you're currently working on. The most you'll get are some mission points on the map, but you'll have to find your way there. The open exploration using the boat was a pleasant surprise, as I ended up spending quite a while doing this. Santa Monica Studios should really take some notes here, because Kratos should have been hopping in and out of boats quickly like Leon does here. Seriously, I would play an open world version of RE4, this boat part is so good. Playing on hardcore for my first playthrough, I was blown away by how much of an emphasis there is on resource management. Moment-to-moment combat had me constantly making quick decisions about what gun to use simply because of my ammo situation. I regularly found myself with the bare minimum I needed to survive, in health and ammo. I was never running around with 300 TMP rounds and 40 shotgun shells. I just didn't find enough in the world to be able to do that, and trust me, I was looking everywhere. This is honestly one of the best changes in RE4 Remake, the resource pressure. It pushes you into smarter play and weapon variety. It's been years since a game made me sweat over ammo and health like this. And when I played professional mode, I don't know what happened. Maybe it was the RNG on the pickups not giving me ammo, or my inaccuracy, or the fact that I wasn't using the bolt launcher to preserve ammo, but I ended up in the cabin fight with no shotgun shells, 1 rifle shot, no grenades, and like 30 handgun rounds. It was an absolute nightmare, and I spent hours in the next areas just trying to slowly rebuild myself to a point where I had a workable amount of resources. This is all great stuff, but I wonder how some fans of RE4 Original are going to react, since they may want to just mow down all the enemies without thinking about ammo all the time. Well, if they want that, there's always lower difficulties. The Breakable Knife mechanic adds another layer of interesting decision making, as melee and projectile parries become crucial to your survival as enemies get in your face and harass you from afar. I typically don't like to rely on parries in video games because I'm not a fan of the ultra defense playstyle, but they work for me here because they tend to be a lot more reactionary like they are in God of War games or Ultra Kill. In an excellent design decision, they allow you to parry attacks while in reloading animations. I can't imagine how frustrating this game would be if you couldn't. You're using knives for insta-kills, eliminating a mutating enemy so you don't have to deal with a parasite hatching, or getting in close on a big guy to do some heavy damage during a stun state. Keeping multiple knives on you makes you feel comfortable slashing enemies on the ground instead of wasting precious ammo, and you can use a knife to escape a grab immediately instead of having to mash out and take all the damage. The knife rework alone makes this game a very interesting and deep experience regarding combat and resource management. And thankfully, they give you knives with enough frequency to let you feel like you can parry when you need to, execute when you need to, and not end up running around with no knives left. You kind of feel like maybe you should be conservative with your knife because they break, but you really do end up with enough extra knives to be able to use them when you need them, just don't abuse it too much. On professional difficulty, I was regularly using them for parries and insta-kills without much of a problem. You can also level up the duration of your main combat knife and repair it when it breaks or takes any damage. The crafting system, which is simple and intuitive, plays an important role in your survival. From the first fight all the way through the late game, I was making hard choices between making handgun or shotgun rounds, between making rifle rounds or a flashbang, because I needed all of it, desperately. The inclusion of the bolt launcher is really nice because it gives you a way to conserve ammo by launching retrievable darts at enemies instead of wasting bullets, and you can use excess knives to create more, which can also be attached with explosives to turn the gun into a mine launcher. It might just be my favorite gun in the game. It's a great method of crowd control, a good way to open a fight. You can set a trap to even the odds when you know you're going to get ambushed, and it's really effective against big enemies with a lot of HP because you can just stun lock them. I shot 8 of these things into the optional dog boss and he couldn't even move. For balance purposes, it has a long readying time, so you need to set it up with anticipation, and the dart travel time is much slower than a bullet, meaning it's easy to miss. Totally acceptable for a gun that's basically giving you free damage. I like that they straight up tell you about this weapon with a note, telling you exactly how it works even though you don't have it yet, asking you to try something new, which is a nice reminder in case you're not experimenting early on, because this kind of experimentation can really help in combat. I gotta say, reading about its functionality honestly got me interested in buying it when I may have just skipped it if I hadn't seen this note. Nice move, Capcom. The inventory is also a little more crowded than it was in the original, or at least it feels that way to me. Because of the space taken up by new items like gunpowder and crafting resources, it's very easy to run out of space if you're carrying a varied arsenal with you. I must have spent at least an hour of total gameplay just looking at my inventory and seeing what I can do to make space for what I wanted to pick up. It's definitely better inventory management than Village, but it doesn't have to be super strict because it's still an action game at the end of the day. There's now a nice auto-sort feature, making space for you if it's easily available, but you'll still find situations where if you really want to fit something in, you'll have to manually go in and move stuff around, satisfying that old RE4 itch for item organization. We also have a form of old-school Resident Evil chest storage, allowing certain items like guns and combat knives and first aid sprays to be sent into storage to be picked up at save stations. You can send a broken combat knife or a low ammo weapon into storage from any point in the game to make room for something you need to pick up now. But that's not very realistic, and we know that anything not realistic is bad, so I guess this sucks? The game has excellent communication of crucial information during moments of decision making. When crafting ammo, it doesn't just tell you how much ammo you'll get and what resources are required, but it also tells you how much ammo you currently have for that weapon. It's a small detail, but it's so user-friendly. You don't have to go looking for your current ammo value in the inventory when you're thinking maybe you should craft something. It's right there in the crafting menu. Another example is how when you're buying new weapons and you're wondering how much better the stats are than your current weapon, you don't have to exit the store and open your inventory. You can see the stats of all your weapons right there for real-time stat comparison. And you can even toggle the upgrades on and off to see the base stats of a new weapon compared to the base stats of a weapon you've already leveled up. Some people aren't going to care about this at all, but these kinds of details are like buying my drinks at dinner and surprising me with a free dessert too. I'm going home with you tonight. So, what do we have here? Higher emphasis on exploration, backtracking, and map studying, item storage, and more inventory limitations, much tighter resource management. It sounds like we're well on our way to making RE4 closer to a survival horror experience than it ever was before. All we need now are puzzles. RE4 Original had a few puzzles, maybe 6, the only difficult ones being the optional puzzle behind the church and the terrible slide puzzle during Ashley's mission. Well, in the remake, not only has the slide puzzle been taken out of the main mission, now appearing only as an optional puzzle to get some treasure, fully validating my years-long claim of slide puzzles not belonging in survival horror games, but we have more puzzles overall. And best of all, they're more involved. We have plenty of casual diversion puzzles, like just inputting the number on a clock that a note tells you, and spinning a square key to line up the openings, which is cute. There's a few mid-tier puzzles where you gotta notice your surroundings and realize what you see around you is related to the puzzle you're solving. And we also have real thinking man's puzzles that'll have you scratching your head for a while until you find the logic. The dining room puzzle is absolutely classic and is definitely my favorite. It's not that it's hard, it's that it's engaging and fun to solve. The laboratory puzzles require a lot of studying to understand the energy paths, and they were pretty fun, though I think some people are gonna struggle with them on hardcore and professional. The sword puzzle is simple but engaging, requiring some thought. The color puzzle in the church is better designed. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the puzzle variety and amount. How embarrassing is it that the RE4 Remake has better puzzles than the RE3 Remake? And let me take a moment to say, I understand that not everyone's gonna like this. I'm well aware that some people just want to experience the action and treasure hunting. Some people will get to these puzzles and get really pissed off that their fun is being interrupted. They'll take real issue with Capcom putting more puzzles into the game, and several difficult required puzzles at that. I just want to say to them that I get it. I hear you. I'm not saying you're wrong for feeling this way about the puzzles, or about any of the other more survival horror style changes that were made to resource management, inventory, map-based exploration, etc. This game feels more like the RE4 that classic fans would have wanted it to be back in the day, and that makes me extremely happy, as a fan of both RE4 and the original survival horror trilogy. But for the people who are fans of RE4, 5, and 6, but not the PlayStation trilogy, I can see these changes not going over very well for them. So if this new approach to RE4 disappoints you, I'm sorry. I think it makes it a way better experience, but I can understand how some of you would think it doesn't. The new aspects of RE4 don't just come from survival horror though. There's also some looter-shooter DNA in this game. Your attache case now comes in 5 different styles, affecting the frequency of item drops like crafting resources or handgun ammo. I went with the red one that helps me find red herbs because good lord I was taking damage left and right and needed to cure myself constantly. That and the repairable body armor that reduces damage and makes me immune to shots and explosions carried me through a lot. The merchant's shooting range plays into this loot mechanic by granting you coins to spend that generate random trinkets to be attached to your case, 3 at the most, granting bonuses to crafting yield, better selling prices at the store, etc. It's just enough to not feel overwhelming. I don't want to turn Resident Evil into Borderlands, but these little additions were a nice detail. One of my favorite changes is the reward for side missions. There are a lot more optional things to do this time around. More of the blue medallions to shoot, of course, but also killing rats, finding certain animals and bringing them to the merchant, and optional mini-bosses that you can challenge. The reward for this is spinels, which were just like any other treasure in the original RE4. Now they are a special currency that can be traded for special items like treasure maps, extra upgrades, valuable jewels, weapon mods, emergency resources. It's so cool that they've given all these optional challenges their own purpose, a separate economy. And these side missions also add to the slightly less linear feel the game has because you're exploring more. There's also a few sections like the lake and the Grand Hall where you can complete objectives in different orders. So that's all I have to say about the changes to the type of game Resident Evil 4 is. Now I want to talk about the combat. I played the game on hardcore and a second time on professional, so that's how I'll be judging it. Because of the increased pressure felt by a lack of resources, weapon variety is necessary not just out of utility, but to save ammo. And an all-new approach to enemy and weapon balance hammers the point home that they don't want you playing stupid or abusing cheap tactics. I'll be honest with you, I loved RE4 back in the day. I played it multiple times, I dominated all the mercenaries missions. I agree it's one of the best games ever made. But whereas I can go back to RE1, 2, or 3 and replay them anytime, I struggle with RE4 in modern times. No, I'm not gonna complain about the way it controls, you can get used to it. It's just that I get bored with it after a few hours. I know you can unlock professional difficulty, but I can't bring myself to complete the normal campaign first. It's such an exploitable game. The guaranteed stagger from a single headshot into that insanely powerful roundhouse kick and then knifing everyone to death, it just bores me now. And by the time I get to the castle, I have got so many resources that I end up trivializing everything. I'm not saying it's like that the whole game, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I can't get past the castle these days. In the remake, now that Leon can move, enemies have changed to compensate for that. They're faster, they surround you more, they grab you to set up other enemies' attacks. They're just more vicious. You have more tools to deal with them as well. Now you can duck projectiles and duck under grabs. There's even a new enemy introduced early on to make you use the mechanic because he swings his hammer around like 5 times and you can duck it and punish. I love the new guy, by the way. The whole animal head thing is really creepy. You also have the parry, which can lead to a free melee on normal enemies if you time it right. But you're gonna have to think about it a lot more this time. Melee attacks are good, but they don't send a group of 6 flying away anymore. If you just run into a group of enemies to melee someone, you're probably gonna get attacked by the rest. You get staggers from headshots or leg shots, but the number of shots it takes is not always the same. I, for one, am very happy that you can't just single shot an enemy in the head and then knock down an entire room anymore. You might get a stagger from 1 shot, it might be 2 or 3. Some people don't like that, they say it makes the game feel inconsistent. I disagree. Inconsistent would mean that something should work every time, but for some reason does not. It's not like that. You have to think of it as a percentage of likelihood, that's all. Go for the headshot and there's a decent chance you'll get the stagger, but hey, you might not. It's not an inconsistency issue like enemies randomly not being affected by flash grenades or something. The reason this is a great change is because of the risk-reward it provides. Getting a headshot stagger from a pistol shot into a melee attack is a strong option, especially since you can use the iframes of melee attacks to avoid incoming damage. If you could get it 100% every time from a single pistol bullet, which costs basically nothing, you would develop the habit of depending on it whenever you could, which is what goes on to break the original RE4 and eventually create boring gameplay. I'm sorry, but it's just lame that you can fire off a single TMP round at a guy's face and then roundhouse him to knock everyone down and knife everyone to death before they can get up. It's cheap. And I love RE4 Original, okay? Don't get me wrong, there's just aspects of its balance that don't sit right with me anymore. Now, knowing that you may not get an instant stagger in the moment you need it, you feel more pressure to pull out the shotgun, or toss a grenade, or spray the TMP. It's a risk-reward situation that encourages weapon variety out of your fear for not getting the easy way out that you want. I think it's brilliant. It's a lot like the balance changes in the Dead Space remake, where they made the plasma cutter not stun enemies anymore, so you'd feel more pressure to use other weapons to keep them off you when they're getting close. It creates more dynamic, thoughtful gameplay. I also like the rebalancing of the shotgun, making it more about focused damage instead of a crowd control option. It feels less exploitable and more appropriate since enemies tend to spread out more in this game. The shotgun not having a wide blast that hits 4 enemies makes grenades and the mine launcher have a better place in the combat loop. AI is fairly dumb from afar. They don't notice you in obvious situations. You can snipe a guy and make his head explode, and his friend right next to him won't notice a damn thing. If this were a different game, it would be an issue. But most of the game is confrontational combat, where this kind of AI exploiting doesn't apply. So when you can kill them like this, it's oddly satisfying because you can just laugh at them. Some guys will set down traps in the middle of combat, and if you step in one of these, it could be lights out. Enemy grabs are a great way to get you out of tunnel vision, because if you focus too much on what's in front of you, someone could sneak up and grab you, and you can't use a knife to escape a back grab. You gotta mash out, and by then it could be too late. I found the knights to be particularly fun, depending on precision neck shots to set up melee strikes to take off their helmets and parrying their sword attacks. They might be my favorite enemy. Overall, the improvements to enemy AI during combat do a great job of putting you under pressure and making you move. I pretty much like all the enemies and their behaviors. I wish we saw more Garadors and Red Cultists though. My only issue I have with the AI is that sometimes you'll be in animations that seem like they should result in you getting some safe frames, like jumping out a window or jumping down stairs, but you can actually be grabbed or hit while in the animation, and it feels kind of bullshit at times. The inclusion of stealth turns out to be a big hit in my opinion. I'm sure some were worried that too much of the game would depend on it, or that you'd have to go through a bunch of scripted stealth sequences, but that's not the case. Stealth can be used tactically here and there to get an advantage, but most of the game is straight up combat. I actually wish there were more optional stealth sections like the introduction to the island. Finding a way in without tripping the alarm, knocking out searchlights, and disabling turrets was very Metal Gear Solid, and I want more. The changes to Ashley during combat are also great. They walk away with her much faster. I found myself in a panic to save her sometimes because I looked away for a second and she was just gone. You spend more time with her, there's more banter and conversation. Leon and Ashley are still kind of flirty with each other, and though she doesn't outright ask for a date with him at the end like she used to, it's still pretty clear that there's something going on. Leon is unfortunately not also flirting with Hunnigan, which is a change I'm not in favor of, and I would be more upset about if he weren't showing interest in Ashley. He is, so his original character is intact, just toned down because this game is a bit more grounded than the original RE4. And that explains some of the stuff that's straight up absent. Now, when talking about cut content, you must do so with some nuance. There's stuff in the original game that isn't here, but there's also a good amount of new content. If you're gonna cut stuff, you need to replace it with something good. For example, due to the extreme goofiness not fitting the tone of this new RE4, the Salazar statue chase has been cut. I can understand that. In its place, we have a sequence happening much earlier in the castle, where a giant is hurling rocks at you and you gotta run to escape while fighting your way through, and you take him down with a cannon. That is how you do it. If you're gonna cut something, you put something in its place that captures the general spirit of the content you cut. But some cuts have been made with nothing replacing them. Fortunately, they aren't entire maps and foundational aspects like the RE3 remake, where they cut out the clock tower level, the park, the nemesis chases, the path choices, and my still beating heart. The campaign doesn't see gigantic cuts like that. It's more like cut moments, but they are iconic moments that I'm sad to see excluded. I'm talking about the cage room in the castle with the Garador, the part with the lift where you have to deflect projectiles and knock Ganados off to their death. This part was cut, but oddly enough they actually put the lift in the level, which made me miss it more than I probably would have if I hadn't been reminded of it. And the freaking laser hallway was cut. I know it was cheesy and stupid, but they easily could have reimagined it into something that fits this new tone. Bigger cuts in the remake are the U3 boss fight, which I'm sad to see go, even though he wasn't a great fight in the original. I just think they could have done something really fun with that whole idea instead of cutting it entirely. And I was dying to see Leon throw a knife into Salazar's hand. I don't know why they would cut that either. They've cut several of the most iconic character moments, and this missing knife throw both lessens Leon's coolness and makes our interaction with Salazar less memorable. Salazar is probably the biggest casualty of the remake because not only does he look just wrong, but he's not silly and pathetic like he used to be. He doesn't call you on the radio anymore, so you get a lot less exposure to him. He talks over the intercom a couple times, but it just doesn't have the effect of actually seeing him while he taunts you like in the old video calls. Salazar called us by video like 4 times, and Leon did things to piss him off, causing him to react like the spoiled little brat he is. It made you really despise the character, which made you want to fight him. Since he has less personality, and the moments with him aren't special, and you don't get to know him, the boss fight with him falls flat because who even is this guy? Not having any real feeling for this character makes it unexciting. Another thing that isn't really a cut but a change is the laser sight. Instead of laser sight being on every weapon like the original, it's just an attachment that gets put on certain pistols. Not all pistols, and certainly not shotguns in the TMP. It's really sad because the laser sight is iconic and a big part of RE4's identity. It's a mistake not to have laser sight options for every gun. In a game that has so much precision aiming, it's hard to see why they would do this. And anyone who really wants to play with the laser sight because it's cool as hell is gonna have to over-rely on pistol just to do so, and even then they won't be able to experiment with anything but the compatible pistols. Bad change. Boo, Capcom, boo. I'm hoping for a laser sight PC mod. So yeah, there are definitely some cuts that were made. Whether they were justifiable or misguided, I don't think they significantly impact large parts of the game the way that the RE3 Remake cuts did. That's the difference to me. They're more like the RE2 Remake cuts, where the B scenario got butchered. Yeah, it sucks, but the core experience of RE2 is still there. RE4 Remake still feels like RE4 Original. RE2 Remake does the same. RE3 Remake does not feel like RE3 Original at all. Yeah, I don't like some of the cuts or changes, but I can't find myself getting that upset over them. But hey, if you think I'm wrong for not being as angry as you are, I'm sure you'll let me know. You'll notice some of my footage was recorded using a no aim zoom mod, which I'll be linking in the pinned comment along with my installation tutorial. It's easy to install, it keeps the camera from zooming in so much. In a game where the enemies are so fast and tend to spread out, you do not need to zoom in this much when you aim. Modding it out greatly helps how combat feels and does not throw it off balance. I've actually heard people say that this mod negatively affects the game because the zooming camera cutting off your side vision is supposed to make you feel surrounded. Hey buddy, I don't need to feel surrounded. I am literally surrounded. Yes, things are a little easier when you can actually see to your sides when aiming, but I don't think it negatively impacts the game at all. It just feels less bullshit. And just to be fair, I played the first half of the game with no mod, and then switched somewhere near the end of the castle. I enjoyed both experiences, but I definitely like being able to see more. And there's still the issue of the camera zooming into Leon's model whenever you're close to a wall, which has led to several frustrating situations that are sometimes just unavoidable. That's what happens when you take RE2's camera and put it in a game that has a different feel to its combat without changing how it works. You get problems. As for the story and characters, I like all the additional world building. There's a lot more notes lying around, reading about the food shortages and the giant eating all the cows was interesting. I don't know how much of this stuff was already present in the original, but it feels more fleshed out here. I like Leon and Ashley for the most part. I think their chemistry is good, though not as good as in the original. And I'm happy that Leon genuinely made me laugh a few times. When he said, "Where the hell am I?" after meeting the merchant, that just cracked me up. Yeah, this place makes no sense compared to the events of RE2. There's a more serious tone to the game, obviously, but it's nice to see the characters haven't become entirely serious as a result. They're toned down a bit, but the magic is still there. Sadler is pretty good. I'm no expert on the RE4 characters. I don't care about them as much as the original trilogy characters, but he felt about right to me. The big improvement is in Luis. He's still arrogant and full of himself, funny at times, but instead of dying early in the castle, he remains with us for hours. He calls us on the comms, he's seen interacting with Ada, and we spend a lot of time with him in the mines. We share the minecart this time, and that whole section is faster and exhilarating. I thought it was a pretty fun spectacle. I know some people are disappointed by it because it is quite different and much less challenging, but so much of the game is challenging, I was okay with having a moment of casual roller coaster fun. It made me think of Temple of Doom. And am I the only person that thinks Luis looks freakishly similar to Ryan from The Office? Krauser, I think, is really badass. I wish we got to see more of him, maybe some flashbacks of his history with Leon. Hunnigan is... I don't know how to comment on her. Without Leon flirting with her, it's hard to get a read on her other than professional woman. Salazar kinda sucks, we went over that, but I mentioned the Salazar boss fight earlier, so we can talk boss fights. I think they're decent. RE4's strength comes from its combat with hordes of enemies. No boss fight in the entire game even holds a candle to the opening village fight, the pool room, the wrecking ball fight, or the double Garador room, which is an absolute nightmare. One of the most challenging rooms I've come across in a while, really good stuff. And it's because waves of enemies keep spawning in to interrupt your focus on the Garadors. This combat system wasn't designed for one-on-one battles, so while most of the boss fights are pretty well designed, and they do some interesting things to make old fights feel fresh, they aren't as satisfying as they could be. I think they need to include common enemy types, because this game's combat shines when you're multitasking. There was a change made to the final boss of the Dead Space remake, where regular enemies start appearing, and that's what we need in some of these fights. Krauser was probably the best fight in the game, because it feels like you're engaging in a lot of the fun mechanics that make the combat great. His old QTE cutscene is now a battle of parries and dodges, which was fun, and Phase 2 in the obstacle course of traps was a good mix-up of an old design. El Gigante was fine, I guess, but I feel the original had a little more going on with a lot more cabins to go in and such, and at the end of the fight he was just standing there waiting for me to kill him. Kinda dumb. And I think the double Gigante fight was way better in the original. They took out the zip lines and verticality to the fight, and it's less fun now. The Vertigo fight was a missed opportunity. It plays out like it did in the original, but they really could have done more with it. I ended up in the elevator room just having to wait minutes for it to arrive, and so I either dealt with him there or ran around the hallways. I wish they had added something really new to this fight. It's not like it was the best moment in the original either, lots of room for improvement. But I will say that when I played again on Professional and tried to kill him, I had a lot more fun. I still wish they'd done more with the fight, but I ended up having a good time more or less. The fight on the lake with Mar-a-Lago is straight up bad, very boring. The original wasn't great either, so I guess nothing has changed. Honestly, I think the only reason we liked it back in 2005 was because it was during the time when giant enemies impressed us just because they were giant. In the second generation of 3D consoles, we started seeing action at a much bigger scale. God of War gave us gods and titans. Resistance 2 gave us the Leviathan, which totally sucked as a boss fight, but we were impressed just by seeing something so huge on the screen. And RE4 gave us the big fish and the giants. Trying to play this fish boss fight now is a miserable experience, and the remake sadly doesn't make it any better because the mechanics have absolutely nothing to do with what makes the game fun. So I guess we're getting into criticism, huh? Well, believe me, there's plenty of it. I absolutely adore this game. I think it's amazing. I think it's important. I think it flat out raises the standard for not only action games, but AAA games in general. But I'm not going to pretend there isn't stuff here I don't like or think could be done much better. Facial animations seem way off from the voice acting sometimes. The Ashley side mission is pretty disappointing. Just running around and shining a light at the knights is lame as hell. Ashley spoils a few simple puzzle solutions by blurting out the answer less than 10 seconds after I enter the damn room. Ada sounds bad, I'm sorry. They got the actress from Welcome to Raccoon City, a movie we wish we could forget, and she plays Ada this time and it just doesn't work. Definitely a step down from the RE2 remake. But hey, that is not a reason to harass the actress, you fucking weirdos. Stop it, grow up. And to those of you actually blaming critics of her performance, like Susie or even in some cases myself, for morons being mean on Instagram, well, you're about as dumb as the people doing this, and you need to grow up too. Blaming critics for the actions of a minority of stupid fans is about as intelligent as attributing a school shooter's actions to being a fan of violent video games. I don't like how the opening cinematic shows a cult ritual. You shouldn't show us stuff the main character doesn't know. It makes it impossible to empathize with him in the opening sections because we already saw what's happening. We aren't discovering it with him. I talk about this mistake of storytelling in my video on the Aliens Director's Cut. Please check it out. The deceleration from running is quite annoying. I guess it's more realistic, but for me it led to moments where I wanted to run up to a Ganado to stab him in the head, but Leon kept running forward and I passed him. By the time I turned around, it was too late. It really makes me miss the snappy movement of the original. Instant start and stop. It felt good. Everything's gotta be realistic these days, I guess. I think the interaction prompt for melee and knife should be different. When an enemy is ready to be kicked or they need to be stabbed, the icon is the same until you get close to them. I think there should be 2 different icons so you know what your options are going to be when you get there. I'm sure I'm not the only person who ran up thinking I was going to melee someone when really it wanted me to stab them, or vice versa. The cannon controls on PC are horrid, the sensitivity is all out of whack, and I had to pick up my mouse several times just to drag it over to the target. AI seems to be programmed to only be aggressive when you're in certain areas of the map. If you're in a fight and there's a door leading to a previous area, crossing the boundary will cause the AI to forget about you and run back. It's an unfortunate exploit in a game that seems to be trying really hard to be uncheesable. It doesn't happen in every area, but it happens. There are occasional moments near the end of certain maps where the merchant will tell you that you should make sure you finish any remaining errands before you leave because there's no coming back. But what? What do you want me to do? It's not like there's a train or fast travel system. You want me to run all the way back half an hour to go shoot that last rat I forgot to shoot for the side quest? Are you serious? The infamous pool room or water room is still a good fight, but it's toned down and should have been a wilder experience, to at least somewhat live up to the legacy of the original. Like I said, it's still good, but it does just feel like a regular good fight, and it should have been something more. Okay, that's enough. Any issue I have with this game is either small, or if it's a large criticism, it simply isn't so bad that it significantly impacts my experience. 99% of this game had me smiling. I'm incredibly happy with it. If it were a shorter game, I would probably replay it a bunch, but I've always thought RE4 was too long anyway. They have improved the pacing a lot though, and the quality doesn't dip like it does in the RE2 remake with the questionable design of the sewer level. RE4 stays at the top all the way through. The village, the castle, the island, it's all really, really good. And it looks so pretty. The lighting especially, the moonlight, the lamps, the fire, every location floored me. There's an awesome amount of gore and grossness, and if you get the lighting right, the characters don't look like they're wearing wigs sometimes. It's also a scarier game than the original. Whether it's their use of darkness to introduce the regenerator or the horrific human experiments you come across, there's a lot more unnerving imagery that makes the game a better horror experience. That's my review of Resident Evil 4 Remake. I know there's stuff I didn't cover, I know there's changes that people will care about more than me. It's because I don't have the connection to RE4 Original that I have to the classic survival horror titles. If there's something else about this game that has diehard fans upset, I'm not necessarily saying they're wrong to feel that way. I'm just unable to relate. For me, this was a solid and mostly faithful remake, and a phenomenal game on its own merits. If this and the Dead Space remake are the kinds of experiences I can look forward to this year, I'm gonna be very happy. I'll come out and say it, I think this is one of the best games ever fucking made. For me, it's not a 10 out of 10, it's close, but it's got a few too many issues that keep it from going that high. But this is the kind of quality experience that allows me to see why other people would give it a 10 out of 10. This is gonna be a 10 out of 10 game for a lot of people, and I get it. It's incredible. Is RE4 Remake better than the original? Come on, that's hard to answer. There's so many differences. But for me, from my perspective, from the Challenge Matters perspective, this remake is better. It's not about graphics or story or even complexity and depth. It's about balance, player accountability, and incentive. The type of gameplay it inspires. RE4 Remake is worlds better than the original in that regard. The standard has been raised once again. Thank you to everyone who watched this video and those who support my work here. I have a lot more Resident Evil content. Please check out my videos on RE2, RE3, Village, my video on classic camera angles. There's a lot to see. I hope you're all having a good time with RE4 Remake. Like and subscribe and comment. I'm gonna go take a long break because it's been exhausting trying to get this out in a reasonable amount of time.